The town of Pine Hollow wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors at night. Tucked between rolling hills and endless stretches of forest, it was the kind of community where neighbors waved from their porches and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. Everyone knew everyone, and life carried on in a quiet, predictable rhythm. At the center of this little town lived Daniel Harper, a 16-year-old boy with a restless spirit and a love for adventure. He wasn't the kind of teenager glued to video games or scrolling through his phone. Daniel loved the outdoors, the feeling of wind rushing through the trees, the crackle of a campfire, and the mystery of the woods that stretched for miles behind his house. To him, the forest wasn't something to fear. It was his second home. That Friday evening, Daniel came bounding down the front steps of his house, a backpack slung over one shoulder. His mother, Karen Harper, stood at the doorway, brushing a strand of hair from her tired face. She'd worked a long shift at the diner, but the worry lines in her expression were for more than just exhaustion. "Be careful, Danny," she said, her voice carrying that mix of pride and worry only mothers know. Daniel flashed her a grin, the kind of grin that could disarm even her deepest fears. "Don't worry, Mom. It's just one night. Me, the guys, and the stars." Karen hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward and kissed him on the forehead. She watched as her son jogged down the gravel driveway, where his two best friends, Ethan and Mark, waited with their gear. The boys laughed, jostling each other as they loaded up Ethan's old pickup truck. It was the last time Karen would ever see her son smile. The campsite wasn't far, just an hour's drive up a winding dirt road that led deep into the Pine Hollow forest. The boys had been there before. They liked to call it their spot, a clearing by a creek, surrounded by towering pines. To them, it was freedom. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the boys set up their tents. They built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories the way only teenagers can, half bravado, half nerves, their laughter echoing through the trees. But as the fire burned low and the night stretched on, Daniel seemed unusually quiet. Ethan noticed it first. "You good, man?" he asked, tossing a pine cone into the flames. Daniel shrugged, staring into the fire. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Mark teased. "Don't tell me it's about Emily from math class." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "No, not that. Just, you ever get the feeling like something's about to change? Like life's pushing you towards something, and you don't know what it is yet." His friends didn't know how to answer, so they just laughed it off. But later, Ethan would remember those words, and they would haunt him. That night, under the blanket of stars, Daniel stretched out in his sleeping bag. His last words before drifting off were simple. "I love nights like this." By morning, his sleeping bag was empty. And from that moment on, Pine Hollow would never be the same. The first light of dawn broke through the forest canopy, painting streaks of gold across the campsite. But to the Harper family, the sunrise only deepened the nightmare that had begun just hours earlier. Their son, Ethan, was nowhere to be found. His sleeping bag lay crumpled in the corner of the tent, his sneakers gone, and his backpack missing. At first, they had told themselves he'd gone for an early walk, maybe to watch the sunrise or explore the trail that wound behind the campsite. But as minutes turned into hours, that hope drained quickly. Mrs. Harper's voice cracked as she called out, "Ethan, breakfast is ready." Her voice echoed through the still woods, bouncing off the trees and dying into silence. No cheerful reply came back. No rustling of branches. No footsteps. Only the quiet hum of nature. Panic spread like wildfire. Mr. Harper grabbed a flashlight, though the morning sun already lit the woods, and began pacing through the undergrowth, shouting Ethan's name with growing urgency. Their daughter, Lily, only 12 years old, clutched her mother's hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. Within an hour, the Harpers flagged down another family camping nearby. Soon, the alarm spread across the entire campground. Strangers joined the desperate search, combing through the forest paths, calling Ethan's name over and over. The cheerful laughter that had filled the campsite the night before was gone. Now, there was only dread. By late morning, the local sheriff's department was called in. Deputies arrived with trained search and rescue dogs, their leashes taut as they pulled toward the trees. Volunteers gathered in clusters, assigned different routes through the dense woods. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades thundering through the valley, scanning from above. The woods became alive with motion, searchers shouting, dogs barking, radios crackling, but still, no trace of Ethan. What unsettled the searchers most was how quickly the trail seemed to vanish. The dogs caught his scent briefly near a cluster of rocks behind the campsite, but just as suddenly, the trail ended. No footprints led farther. No broken branches. No signs of a struggle. It was as if Ethan had walked into the trees and simply disappeared. The Harpers clung to each other as the hours dragged on. With every passing minute, fear wrapped tighter around their hearts. Sheriff Dawson, a grizzled officer who had worked missing person cases before, tried to remain calm for the family's sake. But even he knew, the first 24 hours were critical. By sundown, searchers had covered nearly 2 miles of forest in every direction. They found nothing. No clothing, no dropped items, no trace of the teenage boy who had vanished in the night. That night, under the glow of lanterns, volunteers continued their search. Some whispered that Ethan must have run away. Others murmured darker theories, ones the family could not bear to hear. For the Harpers, every rustle in the bushes, every shadow at the edge of their vision felt like it might be him. Yet each time, the darkness swallowed their hope whole. Ethan was gone, and no one could explain how. By the second day of the search, investigators turned their attention back to the place where Ethan was last seen, the campsite itself. If the woods held no immediate answers, perhaps the ground beneath their feet did. Sheriff Dawson ordered the area taped off, transforming what had been a cheerful family campsite into a potential crime scene. Deputies crouched low, combing through the dirt and pine needles, documenting every object, every impression in the soil. The Harpers stood nearby, holding on to each other, their faces pale and drawn, as strangers in uniforms picked apart the last place they'd been together as a family. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The tents still neatly pitched, the fire pit ringed with stones, marshmallow sticks left half-burned in the ashes. But as deputies looked closer, small details began to unsettle them. Near Ethan's sleeping bag, one officer pointed out something odd. The zipper had been pulled halfway, as if he had gotten out quickly, or perhaps someone else had unzipped it. A few feet away, faint impressions in the soil suggested footsteps, but they didn't match Ethan's sneakers. Sheriff Dawson crouched over them, tracing the outlines with his flashlight. The tread was wider, deeper, like that of a heavy boot. "Anyone here wearing boots like these?" he asked the search team. No one spoke. The prints were unlike those of any of the searchers. They didn't belong to Ethan's family either. They seemed out of place. Even more troubling was what they didn't find. If Ethan had simply wandered off, he would have needed his flashlight. Yet it sat untouched beside his sleeping bag. His jacket, too, was still draped over a camp chair, though the night had been unusually cold. Why would he leave without them? As deputies pushed farther from the tents, one searcher called out. A torn strip of fabric, navy blue, clung to the bark of a tree just beyond the clearing. Karen Harper gasped when she saw it. Ethan's hoodie, the one she had folded into his bag that morning. The sight of it nearly brought her to her knees. But the hope that surged through her was quickly crushed. Just beyond that tree, the footprints vanished. No trail led deeper into the woods. It was as if Ethan, and whoever may have been with him, had been swallowed by the forest itself. Theories spread quickly among the searchers. Some believed Ethan had been taken in the night, lured quietly from his tent. Others wondered if he had wandered off and gotten lost, though the presence of the strange boot prints suggested otherwise. Sheriff Dawson kept his thoughts to himself, but one thing was clear. Something about that campsite wasn't right. That evening, when reporters arrived, the Harpers stood silently as cameras flashed and microphones hovered. Karen couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she clutched Ethan's hoodie to her chest, rocking back and forth as if it were him. The whole town would see that image on the evening news, a mother's face, etched with grief, holding onto the last piece of her son she had left. For the investigators, though, that scrap of fabric and those strange boot prints were more than just symbols of hope and despair. They were clues, and clues meant that somewhere, hidden in the silence of those woods, there was a truth waiting to be found. But as night fell again over Pine Hollow, that truth remained in the shadows. By the third day of the search, Pine Hollow was no longer the quiet, forgotten town tucked between the hills. It had become the center of a storm. News vans lined the narrow streets, satellite dishes rising above the rooftops. Strangers with cameras swarmed the gas station, the diner, and even the church, asking questions the townspeople didn't have answers to. The Harpers' tragedy had become everyone's business. And with that attention came whispers. Inside the Pine Hollow diner, a group of regulars sat at their usual booth, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. They spoke in hushed voices, glancing at the door as though afraid the sheriff might walk in at any moment. "I'm telling you," one man muttered, leaning closer. "That boy didn't just wander off. Someone took him. You heard about the boot prints, didn't you?" Across the booth, a woman shook her head. "And who around here would do something like that? Everyone knows everyone. That kind of evil doesn't just come from nowhere." But another voice chimed in from the counter. "Maybe it wasn't someone from here. You know the highway runs close to those woods. People stop, strangers passing through. Maybe one of them saw the boy." Her words trailed off, heavy with the weight of possibility. By afternoon, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. Some whispered about a drifter seen near the trailhead the week before. Others spoke of an old hermit who lived deeper in the forest, a man no one really knew but everyone avoided. Still others went darker, suggesting Ethan might have been taken by someone he trusted. At the grocery store, Karen Harper walked the aisles in silence, the weight of every sideways glance pressing down on her. People didn't mean harm, but the whispers followed her everywhere. A mother clutching her child closer as Karen passed. A man shaking his head, muttering, "If it was my boy, I'd never have let him camp out there." The Harpers' grief was being judged, dissected, and gossiped about, even as they prayed for Ethan's safe return. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's office, investigators fielded dozens of calls. Sightings poured in from nearby towns. "I saw him walking near the gas station. A boy that age got into a car with someone near Route 9. Each tip raised hope, only to be dashed when deputies confirmed they were false alarms. But one call stood out. A trucker passing through claimed he had seen a young boy walking along the highway at dawn the morning Ethan vanished. He described him as thin, with a dark hoodie, carrying a backpack. Karen's heart leapt when she heard. But when deputies checked the security cameras at the highway rest stop, there was nothing. Just empty road and shifting shadows. Still, the rumor of the boy on the highway spread through town like wildfire. And as hope and suspicion twisted together, Pine Hollow began to fracture. Friends eyed each other with unease. Neighbors who had once shared cups of sugar now locked their doors at night. The forest that had once been their pride became something else entirely, a place of fear. By the end of the week, the Harpers found themselves trapped in a cruel paradox. The entire town was talking about Ethan, yet no one truly knew what had happened. The rumors multiplied, but the truth remained as silent as the woods themselves. And somewhere in that silence, hidden in shadows the searchers hadn't yet reached, was the answer no one was ready to face. As the days dragged into a week, Sheriff Dawson knew he couldn't rely on search parties alone. If Ethan wasn't found wandering in the woods, someone, somewhere, knew more than they were saying. And in cases like this, the painful truth was that suspicion often fell close to home. The sheriff called the Harper family into the station. Under the buzzing fluorescent lights, Karen and David Harper sat across from him, their faces pale, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Between them sat their daughter, Lily, who clung to her mother's arm like she might never let go. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper," Dawson began carefully, "I need you to understand something. In every missing persons case, we have to start with the people closest to the victim. That means you, your family, Ethan's friends. It's not an accusation. It's procedure." Karen's voice broke. "You think we had something to do with this?" "No," Dawson replied firmly. "But if someone else did, they may have known your boy. They may have known his routines." David Harper stiffened, but he gave a quiet nod. "Ask whatever you need. We want our son back." The questioning went late into the night, where Ethan liked to spend his time, who he texted, whether he'd been upset or secretive lately. But nothing they said hinted at a runaway. Ethan was happy. He had plans. He was deeply rooted in Pine Hollow. Still, as rumors swirled outside the station, some townspeople whispered doubts. Why had Karen let her son go camping without adults nearby? Why hadn't David checked on the boys in the night? Some even muttered about tension in the Harper household, though no one could point to proof. But suspicion soon shifted to someone else, Ethan's best friend, Mark Taylor. Mark had been the last person to see Ethan before he vanished. The boys had shared a tent. When deputies interviewed him, his answers felt strangely rehearsed. He insisted Ethan must have woken up and wandered off while he was sleeping. But there were cracks in his story. Mark claimed he hadn't heard a sound that night. Yet other campers nearby reported faint noises in the woods, branches snapping, a muffled voice. How could Mark have slept through it all? The more investigators pressed, the more nervous he became. At one point, when asked whether he and Ethan had argued recently, Mark's face flushed red. "We were friends," he snapped. "Best friends. Why would I hurt him?" But in the shadows of the sheriff's office, doubt crept in. Searchers remembered seeing Mark pacing nervously the morning Ethan was discovered missing. They recalled how quickly he suggested that Ethan might have run away, almost as though he wanted to plant the idea in everyone's mind. Then came something even stranger. In Mark's backpack, deputies found a hunting knife with traces of dark residue on the blade. Mark claimed it was just dried sap from carving wood, but to the sheriff's eye, it looked like something else. The knife was sent to the state lab for testing. While they waited for results, Sheriff Dawson quietly told his deputies, "Until we know otherwise, Mark Taylor is our first suspect." The town of Pine Hollow buzzed with the news. Parents kept their children close, whispering about the boy they'd once welcomed into their homes. Was he just a scared teenager caught in a nightmare? Or was there something darker behind his anxious eyes? Karen Harper refused to believe it. "Mark loved Ethan like a brother," she told reporters. "He would never hurt him." But as the lab worked on the knife, and as investigators dug deeper into Mark's story, new cracks were about to split open, ones that would make everyone question what really happened in the woods that night. The suspicion around Mark Taylor was heavy, but Sheriff Dawson knew he couldn't anchor the investigation to just one boy. Too often, the truth hid in the details everyone overlooked. One evening, as Dawson sifted through reports at his cluttered desk, Deputy Marla came in holding a clipboard. "Sheriff," she said carefully, "we've got something. A tip from one of the campers' parents." She placed the report in front of him. Dawson's eyes scanned the page and froze. The parent claimed they had seen a pickup truck parked near the edge of the forest trail on the very night Ethan vanished. It was an old, beat-up Chevy with mud caked on the tires. The headlights were off, and most unsettling of all, the driver never got out. He just sat there in the dark, watching. The sheriff's pulse quickened. "Why am I hearing this now?" "Because," Marla said, "the man didn't think much of it until the news spread that Ethan was missing. He thought it might have been a hunter or just someone passing through. But the way the truck lingered, it didn't sit right with him." That single detail changed everything. Dawson immediately dispatched units to canvass the area. Residents on the outskirts of Pine Hollow were asked if they'd noticed a strange vehicle. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Several people remembered seeing the same old Chevy lurking around town in the weeks before Ethan's disappearance. It never stayed long, but it always seemed to show up near places where children gathered: the school, the ball field, the diner. A chill ran through the sheriff. If this was the same truck, then someone had been watching Pine Hollow's kids for weeks. The search for the vehicle intensified. Deputies checked parking lots, hunting cabins, even junkyards, but the truck was nowhere to be found. Whoever drove it had vanished as completely as Ethan. Meanwhile, Mark Taylor, still under the weight of suspicion, grew quieter, more withdrawn. When he heard about the truck, he broke down in tears. "I swear I didn't do anything," he told Dawson, his voice cracking. "Ethan was my best friend. But I saw headlights that night. I thought I was dreaming, but maybe it was real." Those words haunted the sheriff. If Mark was telling the truth, then Ethan hadn't just wandered into the forest. He might have been taken. Karen Harper clung desperately to this new lead. "If there was a truck," she pleaded, "then find it. Please, just find it. That's where my boy is." But for every parent in Pine Hollow, the revelation was like a blade to the chest. Their small town, once safe and predictable, suddenly felt like hunting ground. Dawson held an emergency town meeting at the high school gym. The bleachers filled with anxious faces as he laid out what they knew. When he mentioned the truck, a murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. Mothers pulled their children closer. Fathers exchanged tense, watchful glances. And then, from the back of the room, an old man's voice broke the silence. "I know that truck," he said. The crowd turned. It was Earl Simmons, a retired mechanic who had lived in Pine Hollow his entire life. His voice trembled as he spoke. Belongs to a drifter. Man comes through here every couple years. Name's Ray Jensen. Keeps to himself. Doesn't talk much. Folks say he stays in that abandoned shack past Miller's Creek. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. That night, with flashlights cutting through the trees, Dawson and his deputies made their way toward Miller's Creek. The forest closed around them, the air thick with silence. And then, through the branches, they saw it, the faint glint of metal under the moonlight. It was an old Chevy truck, parked, waiting. The woods around Miller's Creek had always carried a reputation. Kids whispered that it was haunted, while hunters claimed to hear strange noises at night. Few dared to venture there, and now Sheriff Dawson understood why. As his deputies fanned out, the moonlight revealed the shack Earl Simmons had described. It leaned heavily to one side, its roof sagging, boards rotting from years of neglect. The Chevy truck was parked about 30 feet away, half hidden by overgrown weeds. "Spread out," Dawson ordered, his hand hovering near the grip of his revolver. "No one goes in alone." They approached cautiously, the crunch of leaves underfoot echoing too loudly in the silence. Deputy Marla shone her flashlight across the truck's hood. The license plate was caked in mud, the kind of deliberate smear meant to keep anyone from reading it. The inside smelled of gasoline and stale cigarettes. Then Marla froze. "Sheriff, look at this." On the passenger seat lay a small object. Dawson leaned in, his chest tightening. It was a boy's baseball cap, blue, with the initials EH stitched in yellow thread. Ethan Harper's cap. The sheriff's blood ran cold. "He was here," he whispered. "Ethan was in this truck." But where was the driver? They moved toward the shack, its broken door creaking in the night wind. Dawson signaled for 2 deputies to flank the entrance, then pushed it open with the barrel of his flashlight. The beam swept across the inside. The air smelled of mildew and something fouler, unwashed clothes, rotting food. The floor was littered with empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and scraps of paper. A filthy mattress sat in the corner, its surface stained. But the most disturbing detail was nailed into the wall. Dozens of photographs. Some were cut from newspapers, others clearly taken with an old camera. They were all of children. Some were playing at the park, others walking home from school, a few even outside the Pine Hollow diner. And in the center of the wall, pinned with rusted nails, was Ethan's photograph. A smiling boy, frozen in time, taken without him ever knowing. The deputies shifted uneasily. One muttered, "My God." Sheriff Dawson clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a missing child case anymore. They were staring at the lair of a predator. Then something caught his eye. On the dirty mattress lay a small spiral notebook. He picked it up carefully with gloved hands. Inside were scribbles, messy, frantic, like the thoughts of a man losing his grip on reality. Words like, "The boy belongs to me, and they'll never find him where the river runs." The river. Dawson's stomach turned. Was this where Ethan had been taken? Or was it a cruel distraction, meant to send them chasing shadows? Karen Harper was brought to the sheriff's office that night. When Dawson showed her the baseball cap, she collapsed into sobs. "That's my baby's," she whispered, clutching it like a lifeline. "He wore it every day. He never took it off." The town's fear deepened. Parents no longer let their children walk to school. Doors were locked tight. Strangers were eyed with suspicion. The once trusting community of Pine Hollow was unraveling. And still, the man behind the truck and the shack, Ray Jensen, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished like smoke. But the sheriff knew one thing. The trail was getting hotter. And if Ray Jensen was watching them, as Dawson suspected, then the game had only just begun. The words scribbled in the notebook, "They'll never find him where the river runs," replayed in Sheriff Dawson's mind like a drumbeat. He knew exactly which river the writer meant. Miller's Creek, a winding artery that split Pine Hollow in two before disappearing into the deep forests and marshlands beyond. If Ethan had been hidden there, the search would be grueling. The creek stretched for miles, cutting through thick woods, abandoned farmland, and forgotten trails. But Dawson had no choice. At dawn, he assembled a team of deputies and volunteers, among them several townsfolk who couldn't stand by any longer. Karen Harper, pale and sleepless, begged to come too, but Dawson shook his head. "Not yet, Karen. Not until we know more." She clutched Ethan's cap and whispered, "Bring him home, Sheriff. Please." The search began at the old stone bridge where the creek first narrowed. Men and women spread out along the banks, combing the mud and underbrush for signs of disturbance. Dogs barked as they picked up faint trails, pulling their handlers toward the woods. By midday, Dawson's deputy Marla called out, "Sheriff, over here." They hurried to a patch of reeds near the water's edge. The mud was pressed down in the shape of footprints, small ones. Too small for an adult. Dawson crouched, his heart pounding. The prints were fresh, made within the last few days. "Ethan," he breathed. But alongside them were larger prints. Heavy boots. A man's stride. They followed together, side by side, until the trail vanished where the water deepened. The sheriff scanned the bank, and something caught his eye, a piece of fabric tangled in a thorn bush. He pulled it free, a shred of cloth, blue and frayed at the edges. Karen's voice echoed in his mind. He never took off that blue jacket. It was Ethan's. The volunteers grew restless. Some whispered that maybe Ethan had been drowned in the creek. Others muttered that Ray Jensen was taunting them, leaving a trail just to watch them chase ghosts. Dawson silenced them. "No, he was here, and he's still alive. I can feel it." As dusk fell, they pressed deeper along the creek until they reached a collapsed wooden pier. It had once been part of an old fishing dock, but now it was nothing more than rotting planks and rusted nails. On the pier, Dawson spotted something unusual, an empty glass jar with holes punched into the lid. Marla frowned. Why would anyone keep a jar like that? Dawson's jaw tightened. To keep something alive inside. A chill swept through the group. The jar was smeared with dirt and faint traces of what looked like crumbs, as if someone had been keeping insects or even small animals inside. A child's toy? A distraction? Or was Jensen using it to torment Ethan, keeping him occupied in captivity? Then came the sound that froze them all. A voice, faint, carried by the rush of water and the whistling wind. "Help!" The deputies snapped their flashlights across the trees, beams darting wildly. "Did you hear that?" Someone gasped. It was weak, distant, but unmistakable. A boy's voice. "Help!" Dawson's pulse thundered. "Ethan!" he shouted into the darkness. "Ethan!" The woods fell silent again, leaving only the creek's steady rush. Some said it was just the wind. Others swore they had heard it too. But Dawson knew deep down, Ethan was close. Too close for comfort. And if they had heard him, then so had the man who had taken him. Somewhere in the trees, Sheriff Dawson felt it. They were being watched. The search team stood frozen along the creek's edge, ears straining, hearts thundering. That faint cry, "Help!" had pierced the night like a knife. Some swore it was Ethan. Others feared it was a trick, a lure meant to drag them deeper into the woods. Sheriff Dawson raised his hand for silence. "No one moves alone," he ordered, his voice low and firm. "Stay close. If he's here, so is the man who took him." With flashlights cutting through the dark, they pressed forward, leaving the safety of the creek and entering the thick canopy of Pine Hollow Forest. The deeper they went, the more oppressive it felt, the air heavy, the silence unnatural, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then they found it. Half buried beneath leaves and branches lay an old hunter's blind, its wooden boards sagging but still intact. Dawson approached cautiously, pushing open the creaking door. Inside, the smell of mildew and damp earth hit him, and something else. Candy wrappers. Dozens of them, scattered across the dirt floor. One of the deputies picked one up. "Sheriff, these are recent." Dawson's eyes narrowed. Whoever had been here was feeding a child, luring him with sweets. He spotted another detail. Scratched into the inside wall of the blind were letters, shaky and uneven, carved with something sharp. EDH. His heart dropped. Ethan had been here. But before relief could set in, the dogs started barking, pulling their handlers toward a narrow game trail winding deeper into the forest. Dawson followed, adrenaline surging, until they stumbled upon another chilling sight. A rope swing, dangling from a tree branch. Beneath it, the ground was worn bare, as if someone had been pacing there for hours. Hanging from the rope was a child's sneaker. Muddy, worn down, and unmistakably Ethan's size. Karen's words rang in Dawson's mind again. He loves those red sneakers. Wears them everywhere. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every step. Some volunteers wanted to turn back, convinced they were walking straight into a trap. But Dawson pressed on, determination burning in his chest. Then came the noise. A sharp crack in the distance, a branch snapping under weight. Everyone froze. Flashlights swung wildly across the trees. Nothing. Just the suffocating silence, broken only by the pounding of their own hearts. "Sheriff," Deputy Marlowe whispered, her hand on her holster. "We're not alone out here." The truth was undeniable. Someone was moving through the woods with them, shadowing their every step. Dawson raised his voice, steady but fierce. "Ray Jensen, it's over. We know you've got the boy. Come out and end this before anyone else gets hurt." No answer. Just another sound, the distant rush of water. And then a laugh. Low, mocking, barely audible, but it chilled every soul in the group. The deputies spun in every direction, searching for the source. Nothing. The laughter faded into the trees, swallowed by the night. For the first time, some of the volunteers broke. A woman screamed that she wasn't going any farther. A man cursed, saying this wasn't a rescue, it was suicide. One by one, they began to retreat, leaving only Dawson, Marla, and 2 deputies pressing forward. The sheriff knew they were in enemy territory now. The woods weren't just a hiding place. They were a trap, a maze that Ray Jensen had built for himself, with Ethan somewhere inside it. And Dawson swore to himself that no matter how dark these woods became, he would drag that boy out, or die trying. The group pressed deeper into Pine Hollow, their flashlights slicing through the dark like desperate beams of hope. Sheriff Dawson led the way, jaw clenched, every sense on high alert. The candy wrappers, the carved letters, the sneaker. Ethan had been here. But the laughter in the woods, it meant they weren't just searching. They were being hunted. Suddenly, one of the deputies hissed, "Sheriff, over here." They had come upon a faint path, almost hidden under tangled roots and brush. It was too deliberate, too clean. Not the path of hikers or deer, but of someone who wanted to move unseen. They followed it cautiously, the night pressing down around them. Then, through the trees, a faint glow appeared. Yellow, flickering, unnatural in the dark woods. A cabin. Small, crooked, with boards warped by years of damp. Smoke curled faintly from a tin chimney, and a lantern burned in the window. The clearing around it was eerily silent. Not even the crickets dared to sing. The sheriff raised his hand, motioning for silence. The deputies exchanged uneasy looks. This had to be it. "Circle around," Dawson whispered. "No one goes in blind." As they spread out, one deputy nearly tripped over something in the grass. He aimed his flashlight down and froze. A stuffed bear, mud-stained, one button eye missing, lying in the dirt. Karen had described it that very morning. "Ethan won't sleep without his teddy. He calls it Mr. Buttons." The sheriff's blood ran cold. Ethan wasn't just here. He had been inside that cabin. But was he still? The sheriff gave the signal. 2 deputies crept toward the porch, guns drawn, boards creaking under their boots. Dawson himself stepped up last, his hand gripping the rusted handle of the cabin door. He pushed it open. The smell hit first, rot, sweat, something metallic beneath it all. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with scraps of trash, old food cans, and filthy blankets strewn across the floor. A lantern flickered on a table, its weak light casting long shadows against the walls. And then they saw it. In the corner sat a crude wooden chair, its arms notched with deep grooves. Ropes hung loosely from its frame, their ends frayed, as though someone had struggled against them. On the floor beside it lay red shoelaces, torn from sneakers. Dawson's chest tightened. Ethan had been tied here. The boy had fought, pulled, maybe even screamed into the night. "Clear the rest," Dawson barked, voice rough. The deputies moved quickly, searching the single-room shack. Under a pile of rags they found empty candy wrappers, a plastic cup half full of stale water, and a crumpled drawing done in childish scrawl. It was shaky, almost desperate, but the image was unmistakable. A stick-figure boy standing under a tree, and beside him, a taller figure with hollow eyes. But there was no Ethan. No sign of him now. Just when despair threatened to sink in, Marla pointed to the back wall. "Sheriff, look." Half hidden behind a stack of firewood was a trapdoor. The deputies exchanged tense glances. Slowly, Dawson knelt, pulling it open. A rush of damp, cold air poured out, carrying with it the faintest echo of movement below. The beam of his flashlight revealed a narrow set of steps leading underground. Dawson's voice was grim, his words heavy as stone. "He's down there." The deputies tightened their grips on their weapons, hearts pounding. Because they all knew, if Ethan was alive beneath that cabin, then Ray Jensen was down there too. And the predator had led them straight into his den. The clearing outside the cabin was silent, but beneath the ground, something breathed. Sheriff Dawson stood frozen, the open trapdoor yawning at his feet like the mouth of some beast. The deputies leaned in close, listening. There it was, faint shuffling, the creak of wood, and then a sound that made their stomachs turn. A child's sob. "Ethan," Marla whispered, her hand trembling on her flashlight. Dawson raised his fist, signaling everyone to stay sharp. "Two men first. Quiet. I'll follow." Deputy Carter and Marla descended, boots creaking on the damp wooden steps. The smell of mildew and something far fouler drifted upward, blood, sweat, and fear soaked into the dirt. When Dawson followed, his beam revealed a long, narrow corridor carved crudely into the earth. The walls were reinforced with rotting planks, and dripping water echoed off the low ceiling. The place wasn't just a cellar. It was a tunnel. Every nerve in Dawson's body screamed trap. Jensen wasn't just hiding. He had built this. A maze beneath the forest, a hunting ground he controlled. "Stay close," Dawson ordered, voice hushed but firm. They moved slowly, lights scanning the dirt floor. Candy wrappers. A torn sock. Scratches carved into the wood like claw marks. One message repeated over and over, etched by small hands until the fingers must have bled. "Help me." The deputies exchanged sickened glances. Then, suddenly, a sound. A child's whimper, muffled, coming from deeper inside. "Ethan," Marla called out before Dawson could stop her. Her voice echoed down the corridor, bouncing into darkness. And the whimper stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Then, from the shadows ahead, a voice answered. Not Ethan's. A man's voice. Low, mocking, almost playful. "Shoo, you'll scare him." The deputies froze, weapons raised. Dawson's chest burned with rage. "Ray Jensen. He was here. Show yourself, Jensen." Dawson barked, his voice booming through the tunnel. "It's over." A laugh drifted out. Not loud, but soft and broken, like a lullaby sung out of tune. And then, another sound. Footsteps. Quick, retreating, moving deeper into the earth. "Go," Dawson shouted. They charged down the tunnel, flashlights bouncing wildly, the air thick and suffocating. The corridor twisted, splitting off into branches. Left, right, straight, it was a labyrinth. And Jensen knew it better than anyone. "Sheriff here," Carter called. At the end of one passage stood a heavy wooden door, its edges sealed with chains. From behind it came the sound of someone banging, small fists, frantic. "Please, let me out." A boy's voice. "Ethan." Marla dropped to her knees, yanking at the chains. "Ethan, it's us. We're here." But the locks were thick, bolted tight, and the keys were nowhere in sight. Behind them, the mocking voice drifted through the tunnels again, closer this time. "You're too late," Jensen whispered. The deputies swung their flashlights wildly, but the tunnels gave back nothing but shadows. Dawson pounded the chains, fury surging through him. "Hold on, Ethan. We're getting you out." But as he shouted, another sound rose, the faint crack of wood somewhere behind them, followed by the sudden extinguishing of light. The lanterns Jensen had left burning in the tunnels went out one by one, swallowed by the dark, until only their flashlights remained. And then, a whisper, so close it felt like breath on the back of Dawson's neck. "Tick-tock, Sheriff. He's mine." Dawson spun, weapon raised, but there was no one there. Only shadows. The predator wasn't just hiding. He was playing, and they were trapped in his game. The underground tunnels groaned like a living thing as Sheriff Dawson steadied his breath. The heavy wooden door still rattled with Ethan's desperate pounding. "Please, don't leave me here," the boy cried, his voice raw with terror. Marla pressed her face against the door. "Ethan, we're not leaving you, baby. Just hold on. We'll get you out." But Jensen's laughter rolled through the tunnels again, low, guttural, and twisted. It didn't echo like a normal voice. It felt everywhere at once. Deputy Carter's hands shook as he aimed his flashlight down the branching passages. He's moving, Sheriff. He could be anywhere." Dawson clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a cellar. It was a labyrinth, designed to confuse, to terrorize, to trap. Jensen had been planning this for years. "Split up?" Carter asked hesitantly. "No," Dawson snapped. "That's what he wants. We move together. Always. Behind the locked door, Ethan's sobs grew softer, broken by hiccups. Dawson's heart twisted. They were so close, but every second wasted gave Jensen the upper hand. "Sheriff," Marla whispered, pointing to the dirt floor. Footprints. Fresh ones, pressed deep into the soil. Jensen's boots. And next to them, a bare, smaller print. Another child? Dawson's stomach turned. "God help us." Before they could follow, Jensen's voice slithered through the dark again, mocking and sing-song. Musical note. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Which way will the sheriff go? Musical note. Then came the scrape of metal, a chain dragging across wood, and a sudden crash. Somewhere deeper in the tunnel, something heavy toppled. "Move!" Dawson barked. They charged toward the noise, flashlights cutting through the black. The tunnels narrowed, forcing them single file. The smell of rot thickened, and Dawson's gut told him what was coming before his light even found it. The beam landed on a pile of clothes. Children's clothes. Torn, dirty, blood-stained. Marla gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dear God. Pinned to the heap with a rusted knife was a photograph, blurry, old, but unmistakable. It was Ethan, smiling, alive, clutching a toy truck, and scrawled across the photo in black ink. "You're too late." Carter cursed under his breath. "He's toying with us, leading us." Dawson studied the shadows ahead. Every turn, every sound, every planted clue, it wasn't random. It was a game, and Jensen was the game master. Then, another voice. A whisper. "Sheriff." It was Ethan again, but something about it was wrong. Too calm, too steady, almost like reciting. "Follow me," the boy's voice said. Marla's face lit with hope. "That's him. He's ahead." She rushed forward before Dawson could stop her. "Marla, wait." Dawson shouted, but it was too late. She rounded a corner and screamed. Dawson and Carter sprinted after her, weapons raised. When they reached her, the sight froze them cold. It wasn't Ethan. It was a recording device, hidden in the dirt wall, playing Ethan's voice on a loop. The boy's cries had been captured, twisted into bait. The realization hit like a punch. Jensen wasn't leading them to Ethan. He was luring them away from him. And somewhere back near that locked door, Ethan was alone. Sheriff Dawson felt his stomach drop. His mind raced through every second of the last hour. They had been chasing Jensen's phantom trails, following his games like puppets on strings. And all the while, the boy they came to save was still locked away, possibly with Jensen circling back to him. "Back!" Dawson barked. "We've been played. We get back to that door, now." They spun around and ran, boots pounding the dirt floor, beams of light cutting through the pitch black. But the tunnel seemed different now. New shadows, unfamiliar angles. "Sheriff, this isn't the way we came," Carter stammered, turning in a slow circle. His flashlight revealed 3 branching passages, none of them familiar. Marla's voice cracked. "What do you mean? We didn't turn that many times." Dawson's throat tightened. The tunnels weren't random. They shifted, curved back, led nowhere. Jensen had built a maze, not just to hide, but to disorient anyone who dared to enter. And then came the sound again. A low hum, at first faint, then louder, like a growl carried through metal. The beam of Carter's flashlight shook as he tried to find the source. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Dawson nodded slowly. "He's here." Suddenly, Marla gasped and pointed. "There. Look." For just a moment, caught at the edge of the flashlight's beam, a face appeared in the darkness. Pale, gaunt, eyes too wide. A grin stretched unnaturally across his cheeks. Jensen. He didn't move like a man. He seemed to slither back into the shadows, gone in an instant, like the tunnel itself had swallowed him. "Sheriff," Carter shouted, aiming his weapon. "Don't shoot." Dawson barked. His gut screamed this was another trap. Firing would waste time, maybe even ricochet in these tight walls. Marla's chest heaved as she clutched her rosary with trembling fingers. That smile? I'll never forget that smile. The tunnels went quiet again. No footsteps. No voice. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. Dawson pressed his ear against the dirt wall, listening. He thought he heard something, faint scratching, almost like fingernails dragging on wood. Then a muffled thud. "Ethan." "He's close," Dawson whispered. They followed the noise, slow and careful this time. Dawson marking the walls with chalk as they went. The only way to avoid looping back into Jensen's tricks. Then, the smell hit them. Not the damp earth smell of the tunnels, but something fouler. Decay. Sheriff, Carter gagged, covering his nose. The beam of his flashlight landed on something slumped against the wall. A body. It was dressed in an old deputy's uniform, the badge rusted and corroded. The face was unrecognizable, eaten away by time. But tucked in the corpse's fist was a notebook, stained and falling apart. Dawson carefully pried it free. On the cover, one word had been scrawled in shaky handwriting. Run. Before Dawson could react, the hum returned. Louder this time. Closer. Marla's scream pierced the silence. He's behind us. They spun around, flashlights jerking. And there he was again, Jensen, standing at the end of the passage. But this time, he didn't vanish. He just stood there, motionless. His eyes glowed in the flashlight beams, his grin unbroken. And then he raised his finger to his lips. Shoo. The sound echoed like a hiss, vibrating through the tunnels. And then, the lights went out. All 3 flashlights flickered, sputtered, and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Marla's sobs filled the void. Carter's frantic clicking of his flashlight echoed uselessly. And Jensen's whisper slithered right past Dawson's ear, impossibly close. You brought the boy's mother. Perfect. The darkness was suffocating. Sheriff Dawson's hand hovered near his weapon, but firing blind would be suicide. Carter was whispering frantic curses under his breath, clicking his dead flashlight like a prayer. Marla's sobs echoed off the damp walls, raw and unrestrained. And then, Jensen's voice returned. Smooth, taunting, with a venomous calm. You finally brought her to me. His words slithered through the black. The mother. The one who cries in church when no one listens. The one who prayed while I waited. Marla froze, clutching her rosary so tight the beads dug into her palm. You monster. Where's my son? A low chuckle. Your son is safe for now. But you know how it works down here. The walls listen. The air feeds on fear. And your boy has so much of it. Sheriff Dawson steadied his voice. Jensen, listen to me. This doesn't end well for you. We've got your scent. We've got the evidence. And the moment we walk out of here, it's over. You want to strike a deal? This is your chance. Silence. Then, a rasping breath. Closer now. Oh, Sheriff, still trying to bargain. You don't understand. I already have what I need. What I want is her. Marla gasped, her back pressed to the cold wall. Why me? Why my family? Jensen laughed, the sound hollow, echoing from everywhere at once. Because once, long ago, someone left me behind in the dark. Someone forgot to pray for me. And I've been waiting all these years for a mother's prayer. For a mother's soul strong enough to break. Marla's knees buckled, and she slid to the dirt floor, whispering, Lord, give me strength. Dawson crouched beside her, gripping her shoulder. Don't listen to him. He feeds on this. He wants your fear. But Marla shook her head. Her voice was shaky, but firm. If he wants me, then maybe that's the price. If it means saving Ethan. No. Dawson snapped, his voice echoing in the tunnel. That's exactly what he wants you to think. That boy is alive, and we are getting him out. Nobody trades their soul today. Suddenly, the darkness shifted. A faint glow appeared ahead, not like a flashlight, but like a lantern. Flickering, yellowish, weak. And in its glow, Ethan. He was standing there, small and trembling, a rope tied around his wrist, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Mom, he cried. His voice cracked with desperation. Mom, help me. Marla surged forward, her heart bursting. Ethan. But Dawson grabbed her arm. His gut screamed something was wrong. The glow didn't light the tunnel properly. Ethan's shadow was missing. And then Dawson saw it. Behind the boy, just out of the lantern's reach, was Jensen. His hand clamped over Ethan's shoulder, his grin as sharp as a blade. Come, Marla, Jensen whispered. Come take your boy. But you know the price. The tunnel walls groaned, dirt sifting down from above. The very earth seemed to respond to his words, tightening the air, making it harder to breathe. Marla's tears streamed freely. She reached out with trembling fingers, whispering Ethan's name like a prayer. Ethan's eyes, wide with terror, locked on hers. Don't, Mom. Don't listen to him. Jensen tightened his grip on the boy's shoulder. Such spirit, he gets it from you. But tell me, Marla, will you give yourself, so he may walk free? Will you finally pray for the forgotten child of the dark? The rosary beads snapped in Marla's hand, scattering onto the ground. She pressed her palms together anyway, voice breaking. If it means saving my son, take me. Dawson's blood ran cold. No. But Jensen's laugh filled the tunnel, drowning out everything. Then the bargain is struck. The lantern blew out, and the tunnel plunged back into suffocating black. The air collapsed into silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Only the suffocating press of the underground. Sheriff Dawson's hand gripped his gun so tight his knuckles ached, his ears straining for the faintest sound. Carter whispered into the dark, voice trembling. "Sheriff, did she really?" "Quiet," Dawson hissed. Then a sound. A small voice, breaking through the black. "Mom." Ethan's whisper, weak, strained, but real. Dawson lunged forward blindly, hands outstretched until his fingers brushed against a thin arm. "Ethan." He scooped the boy close, pulling him against his chest. "I've got you, son. I've got you." The boy clung to him, sobbing into his shirt. He tried to take her. He said she had to stay. Dawson's heart pounded. "Where is she? Where's your mom?" Then, from deeper in the dark, Marla's voice rose, faint, trembling, but unbroken. "I'm here." A dim beam flickered on. Carter had finally fixed his flashlight. The weak circle of light cut through the black, revealing Marla standing near the tunnel wall. Her hands were lifted in prayer, her face pale but fierce. And Jensen? He was gone. The rope that had bound Ethan was lying on the ground. No trace of the lantern. No shadow of the grinning figure. Just emptiness, as though he had dissolved into the earth itself. Marla's knees buckled. Dawson rushed to her side, helping her up as she whispered. "He let Ethan go, but he said it's not over. He said he'd be waiting for me." Dawson's jaw tightened. "He's bluffing. He feeds on fear, Marla. Don't give it to him." But even as he said it, his own skin crawled. Something about Jensen wasn't human anymore. Something about that voice, that laugh, still echoed in the walls. The three of them pressed forward through the tunnels, following Carter's shaky beam of light. It felt like hours, but finally, a crack of dawn spilled through a gap above. Fresh air rushed in. They emerged into the gray light of morning, filthy, exhausted, and shaken to their bones. Ethan collapsed into his mother's arms, clinging to her like he would never let go. But as Dawson scanned the tree-line, his gut twisted. Because carved into the bark of a nearby oak tree, still fresh, were words that hadn't been there before. "A mother's prayer cannot save her forever." His stomach dropped. Marla's eyes caught the words, and she tightened her hold on Ethan, whispering frantic prayers under her breath. Carter muttered, pale as death, "Sheriff, how is that possible? We were underground all night. Nobody else could have." Dawson silenced him with a glare, though his own heart was pounding. "We don't talk about this. Not now. Not ever." But deep down, Dawson knew the truth. Jensen wasn't finished. He wasn't just a man anymore. He had become something else, something bound to the darkness of that forgotten place. And one day, he would return for what Marla had promised. Epilogue. Weeks later, life in the small town tried to return to normal. Ethan no longer slept alone. Marla prayed harder than ever, clutching a new rosary with trembling hands. But sometimes, late at night, she swore she could hear a voice in the shadows. Soft, mocking. A bargain is a bargain. And each time, she pulled Ethan closer, knowing the nightmare wasn't truly over. Because some crimes don't end in a courtroom. Some crimes linger in the dark, waiting.